How many deals did you pass on because you thought, I just don't have the money?
I know when Brian and I first started looking into real estate investing, we were, okay, that's great, but I don't have any money for it. Like, how am I supposed to pay for it? We didn't realize that we were actually sitting on a pile of money.
Yeah, that's exactly what a HELOC does. It turns equity into tangible money and buying power. So today we're going to fix that. We're going to do the HELOC Playbook, and we're going to get right into it.
Yep. No fluff, no stuff, just the real deal. All right, Nico, before we dive into like the nitty gritty like questions, so I want to ask you first, like when you first heard the word HELOC, like did you actually know what that meant or how it could be used? Or was this just like a financial term that you're like, I know lenders talk about this, but like, did you know what it was?
No, basically, I was the second part, right? I'm going back to like before I got into real estate, right? I heard a HELOC. I think my mom may have had a HELOC on our home growing up, but I had no idea at all what it was. And now that we're both in the investor world, we learned what it is and how you can use it for investments. You can use it for fixing up your own home. There's a lot of flexibility with it. So, but to begin with, I'm not super good with acronyms and HELOC. I was like, what is that? What is equity? What is credit? I understood a credit card. I had one. I think they always give you a credit card right out of college, right? And they're like, here, use your credit card. So I understood that, but I had no idea what a home equity line of credit was. Did you growing up?
No, I'll be honest. No, I didn't. I had heard of the term. I think I knew what it stood for, but to be honest, and we're actually going to talk about this more in the episode, so you got to stay tuned to like hear it. But like, I was actually confusing HELOC with another loan product, which is also used to tap into your equity. And I honestly, for the longest, thought they were like the same thing, and I didn't realize that there was key distinctions between like a second home mortgage where you pull or an equity home mortgage where you're pulling out the equity versus a home equity line of credit. I honestly thought they were the same thing for a very long time.
Yeah. And I know most agents listening probably know what equity was, but I didn't even know what equity was. So, understanding the difference between what you own on the property and what the property is currently worth is your equity essentially. And using your home as like a piggy bank and doing it smartly, obviously, is the HELOC is one of the tools. So we'll go into exactly what a HELOC is and how each of us plan on using it moving forward.
All right, let's start from the beginning for those agents that still don't know what a HELOC is. So can you explain to the audience, like, what is a HELOC? Why do you think it's one of the most slept on tools in real estate right now? Like, and why do you think agents aren't getting more informed and are like losing deals because they don't know about this tool?
Yeah. So a HELOC is an acronym, a home equity line of credit. It's most slept on because a lot of people don't realize how much equity they have in their homes, right? So just imagine you bought a home 15, 20 years ago and we went through the COVID boom and now your home is worth a lot more than what it was when you purchased it. And essentially it's dead money. It's there. Unless you decide you want to sell the property, it's money that you're just sitting on. So a home equity line of credit is a tool, and we'll talk about how you can use it for investing or how you can help your clients use it for investing to use that money. Sometimes people are $80,000, $100,000, $200,000 worth of equity that they can tap into to help grow their money. I think I read an article that in the US, there's $18 trillion worth of equity in today's housing market. So a lot of these mom and pop people that have owned homes for 50 plus years, or they have homes free and clear, and they are trying to decide what do they want to do. A HELOC could be a great tool. So we talked about it. And I think the way that my mom used it growing up is, hey, I'm going to use this to fix up a kitchen or to fix up a bathroom. And that's probably the most common way that you do it, but it acts as like a credit card essentially, right? Everybody understands the concept of a credit card. You use your credit card and you pay interest on the money that is outstanding. And if there is no money outstanding, you're not paying that interest. Now, credit cards are pretty high, so that's where they make their money. But a HELOC essentially acts the same, right? So if you are able to if you do have a ton of equity in your property, you can get a home equity line of credit. I know Anna's done this, and I'll let her tell her story, but you can use it to have a line of credit for, let's just say $100,000, and you can do whatever you want with it, whether you want to invest with it, whether you want to fix up your house, and then you're not paying interest on that $100,000 unless you're using it, unless it's outstanding. So You can have a home equity line of credit open for 100,000, but if you're not using it at all, you're not paying interest on it. So that is how I try and explain it to my clients.
Yeah. I tell, honestly, when people talk about equity nowadays, I'm honest, as like equity is just a number. It doesn't mean anything until you actually are able to tap into it and use it, because you may have X number of dollars in equity today, but like what happened in 2008, 2009, people had equity and then prices crashed and that equity is gone. It disappears. There is no equity anymore if the market decides to shift and the value of your home goes down. So I will say equity to me is just a number unless you're actually doing something and tapping into it.
Yeah, and can I add something to that? I think we teach
Yeah,
this
of course.
in the Cash Flow Breakfast Club, and we talk about equity and who owns equity, right? Do you own the equity? No, the market owns the equity, right? Like those people, unfortunately, in 2008, they owned, let's just say 10 properties free and clear, and they're like, all right, in 2009, I'm going to retire. And they realized that their nest egg that was $3 million goes to $1 million. And so that, I don't want to say gambling, but you don't control that, right? You don't control equity. But what you do with that equity, if you currently have it and you use it to grow your money, that's why we're talking about what a HELOC can do and how it can be such a tremendous tool for people.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we're going to cover a couple things because this is where I used to get confused, and now I can actually explain it. It's the difference between HELOCs and some other financial tools that people may hear of, different loan products that they're like, oh, isn't that the same thing? And they're really not the same thing. So I don't know if you want to cover these or if you want me to cover these.
Sure, I'll cover the first one. So a HELOC versus a cash out refinance. So I've actually learned both of these firsthand. And a HELOC essentially is what we just talked about, right? A HELOC is you have a line of credit for, I'm going to keep using easy numbers, $100,000, and you have that. It's a second, usually a second position lien, unless your home is free and clear. It's behind your first mortgage. So if you have a mortgage on the property, you'll have a HELOC right behind that. And then a cash out refinance essentially is going to be replacing that first mortgage, right? In our case, let's say you own a home, it's worth $500,000. You currently have a $100,000 mortgage left. You did really great. In that case, you have a $400,000 gap of equity. The cash out refinance, essentially you're coming in and you're getting a brand new loan to pay off that $100,000 loan. And you're getting let's just say $200,000 loan because you want to tap into that equity. The cash out refinance is usually a fixed payment. So you're starting, whether it's a brand new 30-year fixed payment, or you're like, hey, I want a 15-year cash out refinance payment. But essentially it's paying off the first one and then you have a new one and it's fixed payment. You're paying for that money day one as soon as that transaction's closed.
Yeah. And so in my specific instance, I'll go into a little bit now. We'll go into more later. But like on my home, I've owned it 20 years, had tons of equity because of the time that I've owned it and paid down the mortgage. And then we have the bump up in the increased appreciation over the COVID era, which really like supercharged appreciation. And I didn't want to do a cash out refinance. We still had a little bit of a balance. We had those magical rates that we talk about in other episodes where like 2.5%. And we don't want to give that up. And with a cash out refinance, you are giving up that rate. If you have like a really good rate, but you decide you want to do a cash out refinance, that magical rate doesn't transfer to the new loan. So this is a distinction that I think is important between a HELOC and a cash out refinance is if you do have a loan already on the property and you don't want to give up that rate, that is what the difference between a HELOC and a cash out refinance. With a cash out refinance, you get whatever the current market rate is.
I think it's common, a cash out refinance for those who are listening that are investors. Like it's very common with BRRRRs where you're forcing equity and you're making a ugly home really nice. And then you're doing a cash out refinance to recoup most of your costs. That's a very common product. And they do have DSCR cash out refinance products for investors. But what would you say is the difference between like a HELOC versus a home equity loan?
Yeah. So the home equity loan, I'll say it's similar to cash out refinance. You're tapping into that buffer, that equity amount. But in this case, you're not refinancing the entire like house. Like you're not taking your old loan plus an additional like loan, packaging it into one. In this case, a home equity loan is essentially a loan it's a loan against just the equity in the house. It becomes essentially like a second mortgage that goes against the house, usually in second position because your primary loan is in first position. And so this is another one where you can tap into the equity. You can still keep your killer interest rate on your first mortgage. This will be at the current rates, market rates today. Usually they have a slightly higher interest rate because there's more rate being or more risk to the lender being in second position versus for first position. But this is also another one of those instances where you take out the lump sum all at once and you're paying interest on that lump sum day one. You're not like paying it on just the part that you used or the part you spent. They give you a check, you put it in your bank account, and you now have that money sitting in an account to do as you wish. But now you're paying 2 mortgages every month, not just one.
Yeah. So I wanted to reel it back because we mentioned it a few times, like first position and a second position lien. But do you mind telling like to the listeners who've never heard of that, what that means to be that and why it's riskier for the lender to be in second position versus first?
Yeah. So when there is debt against a property, like if you get a mortgage, basically what happens in layman's terms is that bank will go to the county, city, state, or usually it's the county level. And basically it's part of your mortgage paperwork that basically says that this bank is providing a loan to purchase this property. And that deed is held with what they call a cloud. Somebody owes money on this property. And if they're in first position, which all lenders want to be, if you default on that house, if you as a buyer can no longer pay for that home, then the bank has the right to take that house from you and sell it and recoup the money that they lent to you. It's different in different states. So you have to know your state laws. In some places, foreclosures take years and forever and a month of Sundays. In some states, like I think Virginia is one of them, like if you default on it, there isn't this long process. They can pretty much start foreclosure even when you're still living in the house and sell it out from under you pretty quickly. So being in first position, the bank is more likely to get their money back that they lent to you. So that's why they want to be in first position. They're the first one in line. If you default and that house needs to get sold, they're the first in line to collect their money back. When you have other loans that end up in different positions, like second position, that means it's behind, it's second in line to that primary mortgage. So if that house gets sold, the debt on the first mortgage gets paid completely. And then if there's anything left over, then that gets paid to the person in or the company in second position. If there's not enough money to cover it, the likelihood that second position lender will ever get all their money back is pretty slim. They can go after the person themselves to try to recoup it, but there's no forcing, like there isn't another asset that they can go and be like, hey, I want this sold, I can collect my money. And the further you are on that line, like third position, fourth position, the further you are in line for getting paid, like that person owes a bunch of debt against this house. If you're in fourth position, the likelihood of you getting any money from that wholesale, very slim.
Very rare lenders are willing to go that far, but that's why a second position lien, the interest rates might be a little bit higher than what the first position lien is. So, and every HELOC provider is going to be a little bit different. Some go all the way up to 95% of the value of your home. And then others are more conservative. They're like, hey, we're only going to go up to 70% of the property's worth in your second position cash out refi. So they're going to do their due diligence to say, all right, how much is owed on this property currently? If there's nothing, okay, great. Then they'll most likely be okay with it. But if there is one, what is it worth in today's market? And what's the gap, right? If there's a huge gap and they feel safe, then they're most likely willing to do it. And that's why we did this episode today, because there is a big gap in a lot of people's home that they don't even really know about.
Yeah. And they're focused on the equity. So, and that's why they limit the percentage. They don't want you to completely get a loan for the total value of the house, because again, if the market shifts and that value goes down, they're never going to recoup all of that money. So they like to leave a little bit of buffer, which is why they don't give you a loan for the full equity amount that you have at that time when it's appraised.
Yeah. All right, Emma. So let's talk about the mechanics so the agents can like speak confidently to their clients. What is the draw period versus what is the repayment period?
Yeah. So with a HELOC, how it normally works, like Nico mentioned, it is like a credit card. You basically go through the process. There is like a settlement and you have to sign documents, and then you have this line of credit available to you. If you're not using it, you're not paying on it. But in a draw period, most HELOCs have a window of how many, like a time frame for when you can tap into that money. So if you have $100,000 HELOC and it's got a 10-year draw period, that means over the course of the 10 years, you can go in and you can pull that $100,000, you can pay it back, and then you can pull it again, and then you can pay it back, and then you can pull it again, and then you can pay it back. So during that draw period, you can basically pull back and repay that loan over and over again. At the end of that draw period, like say at the end of 10 years, let's say you still have $50,000 left on that HELOC that you have not paid back. That then gets converted into the repayment period. So at that point, and sometimes it's like a 5-year repayment period, it basically converts into like a fixed loan at that point. You can't draw that money anymore. You can't pull it out and pay it back. From that point forward, you have a window that you have to pay that balance back in full, including interest, to the lender. So that's the difference between those two.
Okay. And why are most HELOCs variable rate and tied to the prime interest rates?
I think it's because they don't know when you're going to draw the money. You could have a 10-year HELOC and your interest rate today when you get it is like super duper low. And that's what you would have gotten in a fixed rate. But then 5 years from now, interest rates may go through the ceiling or they may go down the other way. So in part, it's done that way, I think, because of the long draw period for lenders to be able to protect themselves against these fluctuations in the market so they can ensure that they are getting at least the current market rate for whatever is going on with that money. And so a lot of, I'll say, borrowers may not like that variability. But when rates do dip down, you also get the advantage of the rates dipping down. I feel like over the course of time, it levels out over that 10-year draw period. And I think that's also part of the logic behind the lenders is that it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down over 10 years. It ends up being, there ends up being an average.
Yeah. And I'm speaking specifically like about HELOCs. They are interest only payments, which I know a lot of investors really like that because the payment might be a little bit lower than a traditional loan where some of it's going towards principal and some of it's going towards the interest. Whereas a HELOC, it's just interest only payments. So the lender likes that because they're getting their money, but just making sure that, and we talked about variable rates. So when you're doing it, you want to use it smartly, right? You don't want to just have it and just go buy a boat, right? Or something that go buy, God knows what, pay a wedding or something and not have a game plan. We're the Agent to Invested podcast. So we're always thinking about the investor side and how you can use that money to grow. Because if you're paying 9-10%, you want to make sure that you're making more on that money that's going out. Because I know that's why a lot of the investors that I know like it because it's interest only payments. The payments are a little bit lower.
Yeah. And from an investor perspective, if you're using the HELOC to buy a property short term, like maybe you're buying it, you want to do some renovations, and then you want to do like a refinance, like we had talked earlier, like you mentioned DSCR loans earlier. If they're like managing costs across that project until they can refinance into a fixed long-term interest rate, a lot of times that like just paying the interest is enough to make the numbers work because you're not paying full interest, principal, taxes, like the whole shebang. You're just paying the interest on it. So it helps mitigate budgeting when you're doing shorter term projects. And in most cases with the HELOC, my recommendation is you're not spending money on a HELOC and then putting something on it for the next 10 years. Like this is a short-term solution to purchase something and then turn around and pay it off and then use it again and then pay it off. And I will say non-investor related, if you have clients, I told a lot of my friends as a former Department of Defense employee, I used to work for the government for almost 20 years, when all of these, not political, Doge cuts, people started getting laid off. There was a lot of uncertainty, continuing resolutions. If you're a government person, you know what I'm talking about. You don't know when you're going to get paid. I started advising people before that, like when they saw the writing on the wall, to get a HELOC and not necessarily use it for investing. But I said, this is a good safety net to have. You don't pay on it if it's sitting there and you never use it. But if you know you're going to go a month without getting paid because there's a government issue, a continuing resolution, you can tap into this. You can use it to pay your bills. You still have to come up with the interest only payment, but it's a smaller dollar amount. And then you can pay it back once your paycheck comes in. So from a non-investor perspective, I think this is also a very good tool to educate your clients on to potentially tap into their equity for an emergency fund too.
Yeah. It offers a lot of flexibility. Like if personal things happen and you lose your job, you can use it kind of as a safety net and use it smartly, obviously. But I wanted to kind of talk about you specifically, Anna, because we shared this in previous episodes. You pulled a HELOC, you and Brian pulled a HELOC on your property that you lived in for 20 years. So this is probably a more common story than a lot of people realize. They've owned a home for 20 plus years. It's appreciated a ton. And then you guys decided to pull a HELOC to use it for investment purposes. So what did that look like? Like we won't go specific numbers, but what made you even make that decision?
So when we first started going into investing, I've said this before, we started going to cash flow breakfast club meetings and meeting investors and reading books. And we're like, okay, we want to start this investing journey. But like I said before, lots of people are like, this requires so much money. This is for rich people. Like, who has all this extra money? And we knew we had an asset in our home. I'd had this house for 20 plus years. We knew there was a ton of equity. And initially we're like, maybe we should refinance it. And I was like, I don't want to give up the rate. Like, are you kidding me? Like, the interest rate's like 2.5%. I don't want to go to a 6 or 7% interest rate. Like, that just seems unintelligent.
Yeah.
And so we started looking at, okay, what other options are there? So actually, Brian started doing research, looking at these second mortgages, like HELOCs. Like, we decided up front we didn't want to do the cash out refinance. And then we started looking at HELOC, the home equity line of credit products. And yes, it's a variable rate. So some people, like I said, are uncomfortable with that, like, unknown of what the rate's going to be from month to month. But for us, that just made sense as a way that potentially tap into a large amount of equity that we have. We still have our really low interest rate on the primary mortgage of the house. And the fact that we don't have to pay anything on the HELOC until we use it, that was very appealing to us. So then we decided to shop around with a couple different banks we have relationships with, just to see what kind of HELOC products they had, because each institution is different. They're like repayment or their draw periods are different, how they handle prepayment penalties. Like, it's just a matter of kind of researching. Some are better than others, how much they're willing to loan. Some are willing to loan 60% of the value, 70% of value, 80% of the value. It just depends on the lending institution.
You realized you went to investor meetup, you realized you had a lot of untapped equity, right? So once you decided to do it, you shopped it around, which I always say is good practice. What did you end up doing with it? You invested out of state, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah. So we ended up taking that money, because essentially you get that home equity line of credit. And what you do is you go to your bank and you have that money transferred into your checking account. So you're paying cash. Like, when you're making offers on properties, you're essentially making cash offers on these properties. We're not waiting for a loan. We're not waiting for an appraisal. We don't have to do any of that stuff. So we ended up we had purchased one home in Ohio with Brian's like W-2 job as like an investment property, but you can only do that so many times with debt to income and other things that take into play. So we said, okay, we're going to start using this. And we bought our second home in Ohio as a rental property. We ended up paying cash for it. So we were able to close quickly. We got the deal squared away. And so that's how we bought that property. And then that's also how we bought our 4-unit fourplex from hell, which we no longer own. If you want to hear about that story, you have to go back and listen to other episodes, because we've talked about this fourplex from hell. But we use the home equity line of credit to purchase those other two, like our second and third properties in Ohio. And then what we did is, once we stabilized the single family home, we refinanced it. We basically paid back the HELOC. Then we did the same thing eventually with the 4-unit building. We refinanced it, paid back the HELOC, and then we were able to use that HELOC to buy our duplexes in Southern Virginia.
Yeah. So many nuggets right there, right? So you used it, and I think this is probably one of the most powerful things about a HELOC is, like you said, you're able to use that as a cash offer, right? You're using, and obviously it depends how big your HELOC is, but they went to Ohio where the purchase price is a little bit lower than it is here. And they're able to, there's no financing contingency. We have the money. You still want to make sure you're buying good deals, right? But you were able to go from 0 to 1 using money that you already had, right? So you didn't have to go get a second job. You didn't have to get a third job. You used a home equity line of credit, a tool to help fund your investing journey. So for the agents that are listening, they might be dealing with an investor that doesn't even know how much equity they have in their home and how they can use this as a tool. If you help them buy their second, third, fourth investment property, not only are you educating them on the HELOC process, but you're getting commission on all these other deals. So, and what Anna has mentioned, they buy it cash, and then once they have tenants in there, it's all stabilized. They're doing a cash out refinance, which we talked about earlier, to get it in a fixed payment for 30 years or whatever you're comfortable with, and then paying back the HELOC. So essentially, the money that you're putting out comes back after you do the cash out refinance and you pay the piggy bank, essentially, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I asked that question, but I also know that you're using it for short term, right? You're looking, you ended up in Danville where you're doing BRRRRs and you're also using your HELOC as a tool so that you're paying most, if not all of your costs back, right? That's the game plan.
Yeah, that is the plan. Actually, we're in the process. I don't want to jinx it, so I'm afraid to say it out loud. But so the one property that we bought in Danville, watch different episode for details, but it was single family and we converted it into a duplex. That we used the HELOC to fully fund the purchase and the renovation of that property. And it's now done, fully filled with tenants, making money. It's great. So we're actually in the process right now of doing DSCR type loan to get it refinanced, and the appraisal came in higher than even we expected to. So Brian and I were actually in the conversation earlier today while we were having breakfast trying to decide, because it's all a numbers game. You have to make sure you understand the numbers. Like, how much do you pull back? Like, do you leave some in because you want to make sure that the property's still cash flowing? But we're basically in a position where, because of how high it appraised for, it's going to end up being more than a perfect BRRRR. We'll be able to pull back all the money, fully pay back the HELOC for the money that we paid into it, and then have some left over, which we are considering using to then pay for an ADU that we're building in our primary residence. So we'll have the HELOC. The HELOC had a 10-year draw period. We're only 3 years into that draw period. So the point is to keep using that HELOC in a very similar way to that we've been doing. But that's the current story, which Nico didn't even know about. Yeah. This all just happened.
That's so exciting. I love when appraisals come up high, and the perfect BRRRR, and I mentioned the perfect BRRRR is when you're able to recoup all your funds. So in a quick example, $100,000 goes out when you do the cash out refinance because you did such a great job with the BRRRR. It's worth so much more. You're able to recoup all that 100,000 and some. Sometimes you're able to gain money because you did it. And Anna's just talking about, you want to do it smartly. You don't want to pull out a whole bunch of money because it'll be negative cash flow. The rents aren't going to keep up with that new payment. The more money you take out, the higher your monthly payment is. So you just want to do it smartly. So we talked a lot about like what worked and what was your superpower. But when you were doing this, was there anything that was like, holding you back? Was there anything scary? Was there any hesitancy? We talked a lot about the pros. Was there anything in your opinion that,
I mean, there's always risk in everything we do, and risk in crossing the street. Let's be real. So this HELOC is against our primary home. So we have to make sure that we pay it, because if not, that is going to be a lien that comes against our primary home. So I don't want people to think like this is free and clear money. There's no downside to it. If you screw this up royally, you potentially lose your primary residence. I knew because of the way we are, I wasn't too worried about that. That may have crossed my mind ever so slightly. But I guess it's like with any loan, I can't say there's anything specifically about the HELOC aside from the fact that it puts one property in jeopardy if you don't do well on a different property, or depending on what you use the money for. But aside from that, like at first I was going to say, like, then we're paying, like, we're trying to rehab this property and we paid for cash, but we have to have another income source to pay the loan back because we haven't rented it yet because we were fixing it up. But to be honest, that happens with any loan.
Yeah.
Not just the HELOC. So personally, no. I think the biggest risk that someone should just take into account is using the money smartly, because you are jeopardizing one asset in the pursuit of other assets. And in most cases, it is much easier to get a HELOC against a primary residence than it is to get against a rental property. Only certain lenders will do HELOCs against rental properties. So it's usually against your primary residence that you're putting this against.
Yeah. And you just teed me up to my next question. Look at you. Podcaster pro. So I like that you mentioned the primary. Lenders feel more comfortable. Heaven forbid, if you were to default, you're going to be paying your primary residence, right? They are more comfortable with lending towards that. So a HELOC is most common with a primary residence. But being in the investor space, I remember for years, I was like, do they do that on investment properties? I personally own a property that has over $400,000 worth of equity. And I'm like, well, that would be pretty cool to tap into. So Brian Maddox, who is a friend of ours, he is a lender broker, investor friendly broker. He has products that are geared towards people like me that own real estate properties that have a ton of equity that we want to tap into. So I'm actually currently in the process, and I also don't want to knock on wood. I'll knock on wood as well, but we're doing the exact thing that Anna just talked about to pull out some HELOC on an investment property. Now, we're also going to make sure that we're doing it safely. The goal is to have it out short term. You don't want that money out long because all the reasons we talked about, the higher interest rate, the variable interest rate, and things like that. But being able to understand if you are an investor, or if you're working with an investor client, reach out to Anna and I, because we do know people that are doing this product, which is pretty cool.
Yes. And for whatever reason, what you were saying reminded me, like, quick nugget in case this didn't click in your head. If you don't have an investment property to pull from, some people do, I'll say, the house hacking strategy when it comes to building their portfolio, where they live in the property and then eventually they rent it and then move into the next one. If you want to try to do this HELOC strategy because you realize you have equity in a property, get the HELOC before you move out.
Yes.
And then turn it into a rental and move into your next property. Do what you need to do there for the next 1 or 2 years. If you have equity built, or HELOC on that property. And then again, crunch your numbers and make sure that it makes financial sense and that you can cover the costs with the rents. But if you're having trouble finding a lender that can do it on an investment property, or if you don't have an investment property right now, that's one way to use a HELOC, like, going forward, is to just get it on the property while you're living in it. There's nothing that says you have to stay living in it once you get that HELOC.
Yeah. I like that nugget because, yeah, that strategy, if you're doing the house hacking, that's a great way to start building your portfolio. And if you do it on one of your first ones that you know has a good amount of equity, you can use that as a tool in the future.
Yep.
So speaking specifically about the investment property HELOCs, there's different ways that you can qualify for these. And again, I'm still learning about this because I'm doing it currently. But because it's an investment property, there's ways that you can have it from the property to actually qualify itself. Similar. So a DSCR loan is an asset-based loan. It's looking more at the property and less about you. So a DSCR HELOC essentially is the same thing, right? They're looking at how much it's currently rented. If it is currently rented, what's your payment if you have a mortgage on the payment, and then they'll do a HELOC for the difference. So essentially it acts like a DSCR loan, but it has a revolving credit window, everything we talked about before. So that's just the qualifying. So there's two different ways. That's one way. And then the second one is a bank statement loan, which is actually the one that I'm doing. And it looks at your bank statement, sees how much money is coming in, and you can use that kind of like a way to qualify for the HELOC. So they see how much money's coming in and they use you as the borrower. So it's just different types of loans. And these are probably going to be changing in the future. So working with somebody that actually knows all these products, a lender that can help you, because every situation is going to be a little bit different, that can guide you to the best products.
Okay, now I get it. I'm slow kidding class. So these are basically we're talking specifically to agents that are potentially looking for loans, and just the difference between the DSCR HELOC is it's based on the property and the income that the property generates, not necessarily on you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't have a DSCR HELOC, then you can basically get a loan for your own properties, but it's based off for your bank statements and the income you generate. Because yes, when you're self-employed and you use tax laws to your advantage and you write off things, then it looks like we made no money.
Yes. Where I think we had Brian on our show and he was like, banks hate you guys because we're not very bankable, or investors and agents, because we do have a lot of ways that on paper, it doesn't look like we make a lot of money. So just trying to make sure that you understand these products in different ways that you can qualify, whether it's the property itself or you as the borrower.
Now we're going to pivot a little bit. So obviously same topic, but I know a lot of people may have heard of hard money loans. Hopefully they understand what hard money loans are, if you want to throw in real quick what that is. But like, why in this case, so the audience can understand, like, hard money loan versus a HELOC for an investor that's trying to do something a little more short term, maybe a fix and flip or a rehab and refinance. Like, why do one over the other?
Yeah. Yeah. So for those who don't know, hard money sounds so harsh every time I bring it up, but hard money is essentially they're lending. This is an institution that's lending on a hard asset, a tangible asset, which in our case is a property, right? It's a house. And they'll fund usually anywhere from 70, 80, sometimes 90% of the purchase. So you'll have to come up with the difference, and they'll pay for 100% of the rehab. So most people that are using hard money are doing it for either a fix and flip or a BRRRR like Anna and Brian. So you use it kind of like a short term to then eventually, whether you're selling it or whether you're refinancing to keep it as a rental, you pay off the hard money lender. Now, where that differs from a HELOC is, I would say a HELOC, you have a lot more control, right? Anna just mentioned she was renting properties, writing offers and cash offer. It's very quick. Once you're approved to the HELOC, the money goes into your account and you're ready to go. Whereas if you are using hard money, yes, it's usually pretty quick, but you still have to make sure that the loan is approved, right? So if you're writing an offer with no financing contingency, for example, and the deal is actually not really a good deal, and you don't, and the hard money lender's like, yeah, I'm not going to lend on that. You can really lose your shirt. So, and then there's a lot of like other hoops and things. A lot of people don't know hard money for the rehab budget is they reimburse you. So if you're doing a full rehab that's $100,000, you need to have some money in reserves to start that project because they're going to come and check to make sure, let's just say, hey, $10,000 to clean out and gut this whole house. All right, I'll do that. And then I get reimbursed. They send somebody to do it. So whereas if you're using a HELOC, it's your money, right? You'll be using a contractor or if you're doing it yourself, but there's a lot more control and flexibility that you can do when you're using a HELOC. So those were the things that I thought of. Was there anything in your opinion that I guess differentiates the hard money versus HELOC and pros and cons?
Yeah, like I think in a lot of investing circles, you hear hard money a lot. I feel like you don't hear like the term of like, oh, you should get a HELOC so that you should eat.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is usually you have hard money lenders that show up to a lot of investor meetings. So they're talking about their products as lenders. And so you don't have a lender showing up saying, hey, I have a HELOC product for you. So I think in a lot of cases, the investors go towards hard money because that's what they hear about. They don't think about like the HELOC. I will say, if you don't already have a HELOC in place, this is where I can see where someone may go for a hard money lender if they do have a project that needs to close quickly, because to close on a HELOC, it is faster than like buying a house, but it is not that much faster. They still have to go through, they have to do an appraisal, they have to have an appraiser come out to set everything up. You need to close on the HELOC. So I think if you don't already have that home equity line of credit set up, a hard money lender would be the faster way to go if it's a property that you need to move quickly on to close. Personally, if you have the HELOC already in place and you have the buffer to cover it, like if you have a smooth credit on that line of credit to buy it, I would advise using the HELOC because that's money that you're paying interest only on, probably a slightly better rate than, even though they do charge higher interest rates on HELOCs, hard money lenders will also tack on additional points and other things. So you're probably going to pay more for that money with points and higher interest rate. Nico said you can move faster with it, but you have to have a HELOC in place to be able to move at that speed and take advantage of those challenges. And if you didn't think to put one in place and you need to move quickly, a hard money lender is going to end up being your better bet.
Yeah. And you have to have a property that has equity, right? Whether that's the golden nugget, right? You need to make sure that you have a property that has equity to get home equity line of credit, right? If you just bought a home with 0% down, 3% down, chances are you aren't able to get a HELOC on that property because your loan to value is already really high. So in that case, maybe a hard money loan would make more sense for you.
Yeah.
So that's hard money versus HELOC, but I want to speak specifically to the person that's like, I can't invest. What do you say to those people that are like, okay, I can't invest, but I might have equity in the property?
Oh yeah, I talk about it all the time. So when I talk to people that have, like, I have that conversation with them, I tell them, how long have you owned your property? How much is your mortgage? So we can figure out what the value is of the equity. And then if it's something that they really want to go into or potentially they're thinking about in the future, I do share my experience. I say, this is what we did. I tell them, I always add the not the red flag, but like the warning label. Like, you have to be smart about your numbers. You have to take into account, like, when you're looking for deals, like you can't just go willy-nilly. They sound so old. Like buying properties. But I do tell them, I share my story. And then at the very minimum, I tell them if it's something they're considering, it doesn't hurt. Like, talk to a couple different lenders, understand, like, especially if you have relationships with a couple different banks, see what kind of HELOC products they have available, what kind of lines of credit, how much you can possibly pull out, what that would look like. And then they can decide from there if that's something that they want to pursue. I'd feel like sometimes people just need to see the numbers. Like, okay, you told me what you did with your HELOC. You told me the concept of how a HELOC works, but I want to see it on paper. Like, I want to see, like, what does that mean interest rate wise, potential payment wise, how much can I actually get out, for how long? And then we go from there. I tell them it's a great way. Like I said earlier, like equity is just a number until you do something with it. So if you really want to get into investing and you keep talking about wanting to tap into your equity, like it makes sense. I do also ask them what their current interest rate is, to be fair, because this is another point where, like, if they do have quite a bit of equity they built out because maybe they put a big down payment down or paid extra monthly payments, but they got it a couple of years ago, but after the interest rate started to go up, could they do a cash out refinance? I don't know. Sometimes if rates did tend to go down, then maybe it makes more sense for them to do a cash out refinance. I don't know if that's the environment we're in now with interest rates, but there may come a time where, looking at the whole picture, we're like, oh, I might be able to refinance and get a 0.5 percentage point less and pull out equity. Just makes more sense than doing a HELOC.
Talking the numbers, right? But you mentioned, and you were in this situation, right? You had a 2.5% interest rate, and there's so many people that refinanced during that COVID boom. One of the reasons why there's a housing shortage, that's a whole nother story, but weighing that in, whether you decide to do the cash out refinance or using the HELOC. But you mentioned like kind of looking at the numbers. So I brought my calculator out and I wanted to kind of give an example for somebody who, let's just say they own a home that's worth $650,000 in today's market, right? And the home equity line of credit is willing to go up to 80%. So you times that by 0.8, and they currently have a loan of, let's just say, $300,000. So you subtract that by $300,000, and that brings us to $220,000 that they would technically be, you can have the full availability. If you decided to go there, you can go shorter if you're really risk adverse and you don't want to have that. But that's just a real life example here locally in Montgomery County. 650,000 is around the median sales price. And it's not unrealistic for somebody who's owned the home 15 years to have 300,000, sometimes less, of a first mortgage. That's the type of money, tangible money, that you can use and you can tap into using a HELOC, whether you want to use it like Anna and invest, or just to have the home equity line of credit open for emergency or a rainy day in case something happens. Or you can use it like my mom did and fixing up the kitchen and paying it back over time. But it gives a lot of flexibility, and a lot of people just don't realize how much money they have tied up in their equity in their homes.
Yeah. All right. So we're getting close to the end here for this episode. I think we've covered a lot of bases. We actually said a lot of these things already throughout the course of this episode, but I don't want to do anybody dirty and be like, man, this is like free money. Like, we should totally go for it. I think we should recap. Like, okay, so we talked about all the wonderful things. We've sprinkled in some of the bad things, but I just want to like focus in. Let's talk to people and, like, no kidding, like, this is the list of the things that maybe are cons when it comes to a HELOC, just to have it in one place so everybody, I want to make sure everybody's informed.
The first thing is variable rates, right? So I think we talked about rates and mortgage rates in the last episode, but being aware that they can fluctuate. They can go higher. If you're lucky, they can go lower, but making sure that you're using it smartly, right? And you're not, I love the way that Anna and Brian are using it. They're using it as essentially like a bridge loan to buy the property and then to get it stabilized with long-term financing and then pay off the HELOC. Where people get in trouble, at least in my eyes, is they're doing it and they're buying, if they're smart, they're buying investment properties. And if they're buying other things, like I keep going to a boat, I don't know why, but if you're going to buy a boat or something that you're not able to pay back relatively quickly, then a deal that pencils today, in 3 years, it might be completely different, especially with everything that's going on in the market. So that's probably one of the things that I want to make sure, if we're working with clients, let them know, hey, HELOCs are variable rate. So paying attention to that is very important.
Yeah, buying a depreciating asset, I think, is what you're trying to hit on. Because even your mom using it to like redo the kitchen, that's an appreciation play, because that's going to update the kitchen. That's going to increase the value. But if you're buying an asset that's a depreciating asset that isn't going to grow, that is a risk. And I will also say, if you're trying to pencil out a deal and your margins are razor thin, where you're banking on this interest rate not going up a whole lot, you don't know what could happen with that variable rate. And if it goes up higher than you expected, your whole deal could fall apart. So because I know a lot, especially when you're a newer investor, you find a deal and you want to make it work. Like, you know, in your heart, it probably doesn't, but you're like, I'm going to cut a little bit
Your
here and cut
emotional
a little
brain.
bit there. And yeah. So that is like you were saying, the downside to a variable. I just want to like nail that in. Like, if your like deal underwrites and it's like razor thin margins and it's based off of the interest rate, if this variable rate goes up, then you could be in a lot of trouble.
Yeah. And then one thing that you touched on earlier as well is the home itself is collateral, whether it's the investment property that I'm using or Anna's primary home HELOC, you're using that as collateral. So if shit hits the fan, it's your property that is up. So making sure that your loan to value on your primary, you're not maxing it out at 100%, right? You're doing it safely and making sure whatever you do, you're doing it safely and you have a game plan to pay it back.
Yeah. And something that we didn't talk about, and this doesn't happen, I think, nearly as much, or it's more rare for it to happen on a 30-year fixed mortgage on a primary residence, is that if like the economy gets into a shaky position, if a bank ends up in a pinch and something is going on and they need to pull back funds like immediately, a lot of the loan products that they will cancel outright and call them amount due are things like HELOCs. So there is that danger there, is if we enter into some kind of economic crisis, if that lending institution has an economic crisis of some sort and they need to pull back on credit lines immediately, things like HELOCs are the first thing to go. So could it happen? Absolutely. So you just want to have that in the back of your mind, because if you have a $200,000 HELOC and you have 150,000 of it out because of the project, and they say, okay, we're pulling your line of credit and we need this paid in the next 30 days, and you have no pathway to get done in the next 30 days, that could be a real issue.
Mm-hmm. So the theme is discipline, right? Making sure like leverage is real and you want to make sure you're being disciplined with the way you're using it. We understand as real estate investors, we need leverage. We need to use loans to help scale. People like Dave Ramsey, for example, anti-loan everything. But he also has some great tips of like making sure you're not over leveraging, right? You don't want to max out everything and then one thing happens, your whole real estate portfolio crumbles, right? So using your HELOC smartly, whether you're using it yourself for investment properties or things like that, or if you're not guiding because we're not CPAs and things like that, but if a client asks us, hey, what do you think about a HELOC and using it to buy the next property, we should be informed of how you're using it. You can use Anna's story of how she's using it to scale her properties. You can use my story of how you're able to do it. And if you're actually curious to the lenders that are doing that on investment properties, always reach out to me or reach out to Anna to learn a little bit more about it.
Yep. Okay. I guess we're at like the end of the show, right?
Yeah. So I think that's gonna do it for today's episode. All about HELOCs and pros. I wouldn't say it's cons, but it's the things to be aware of.
The bad and the indifferent.
Yeah. And how you can use it to scale your portfolio. If you have questions about it, feel free to reach out to me at ngarcia official on all social platforms, and you can reach out to Anna at
Anna Bialik _realtor. And if you are local to our area, I think Nico might have just had his Cash Flow Breakfast Club, but checks out, find us, reach out. We have one every month. This is the kind of meetup that you go to and learn about this kind of stuff. Like I said earlier in the show, I thought like cash out refinance, second home mortgage, HELOC, I thought it was all the same thing. I was like, I know you're pulling money out of your house, but if you're going to do one thing this week, aside from educating yourself a little bit more on HELOCs, is maybe like find one of those meetups, because you will learn all kinds of assets and tools that you can utilize for yourself and for your clients.
100%. Come hang out with us. We're all cool people. All right,
we
guys.
think so.
Well, tune in to the next one. All right. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.